Hey, PerfBytes listeners, before you get started on today's episode, we'd like to mention the generous support of our sponsor, Flood.io. Whether you need to load test a single URL, simulate realistic user scenarios with JMeter, or execute extremely large concurrent volumes with Gatling, Flood.io actually provides a simple and affordable platform to doing it all. The Flood.io tooling is actually really nice. It's got real-time live results. You can instantly see and monitor your tests in real time. They have a really great dashboard that makes it easy to control the whole grid of machinery, execute different tests, share the results, and they also integrate with Amazon Virtual Private Cloud. So if you need to launch on-premise secure grids, you can do that. Another thing you can do, which I did recently, is visiting the Flood.io website and taking the JMeter Challenge. It's actually part of their blog. I know some of you just can't get enough of the obscure transport-level HTTP correlation in your regular day job. So, go and take the challenge and actually post it on there. It's a really fun thing to do. Please give some attention to these guys because they're helping keep PerfBytes on the air and supporting the great shows and learning opportunities that PerfBytes provides to you. Special thanks to our sponsor, Flood.io.
It's time for PerfBytes.
What the is PerfBytes?
The fourth square meal of the day. Simple like PerfBytes. Waffles, microwave ready. Blobbity blah, blobbity blah.
Add nutritional value to your brain.
It's time for PerfBytes with your hosts Mark Tomlinson and James Pulley.
PerfBytes.
Whatever.
Hey, it's time for PerfBytes. We're back from Phoenix, Arizona, and officially, I think, James, we're in November now, which means happy anniversary to PerfBytes, right?
Yeah, we made it a year.
We made it an entire year. It's very exciting. It was Hurricane Sandy last September, so the last two episodes we've mentioned our anniversary. So happy birthday to you, James. I mean, PerfBytes to us.
Yes, we're now officially, I guess, a toddler.
We are officially a 1-year-old toddler. That's right. This fascinating topic we have here today is on, near and dear to so many people's hearts, that the whole world has given up on PCs. I was raised in computing on PCs. Now we're going mobile, right? So we have a pleasure. We have a guest host, Ophir Prusak. Ophir, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, James and Mark.
Absolutely. Ophir joins us from our good friends at BlazeMeter, blazemeter.com. And you're broadcasting from New York City, the Big Apple.
Yeah. It's really cold, I have to say. It got actually freezing last night.
Freezing last night. How many people kept warm by their iPad? Kept cuddled up next to their battery while it was charging. That sounds. You think about how many. There are like 8 million, 9 million people in all the boroughs in Manhattan, or just in Manhattan alone. How many of them have mobile devices?
I think the question is how many of them have more than one mobile device?
That's right. Everyone has more than one mobile device. That sounds very good.
Mark, I know when I look at logs these days, I'm looking at 30 to 40% of all the connections are coming from some sort of mobile browser, even on non-mobile sites. It's just accelerating.
Yes. Non-mobileness becomes mobileness. Everything is now mobileness. So we've been saying all this stuff about mobile for like 5 years, and I can go back 5 years. All the classic load testing, performance testing was like, let's focus on the network, because the network, that's the slowest part that we have. We'll focus on that. And of course, don't forget about the back end. And I just talked about this at STPCon last week, actually 2 weeks ago, mentioning that the impact of mobile latency transactions on the back end. And then there's native versus hybrid. There's a lot of stuff that we talk about in performance that's about keeping the system, the end-to-end network system in the back end working. Today, we want to talk about what the actual device, really want to dig in on the mobile apps and the mobile devices themselves, because even the devices themselves have changed dramatically in 5 years, right? So that's like the smartphones have gone and exploded. Tablets have exploded, different sizes, different form factors, and we want to dig in a little bit more for you folks building apps and how to engineer an app that actually can work with the components that are built into that device. All right, so before we dive in the deep end of the pool, the mobile device app pool, James, bring us up to speed on what's happening in the wide world IT news.
I almost feel like we need to have like a typewriter going in the background for this. Okay. And Mark, in tandem with our discussion of mobile and tablet, as you've mentioned,
yes,
Microsoft is looking to sell 16 million tablets over the holidays.
Ooh.
Exactly. And you know what? I wonder how their partners feel about this. You know, Microsoft used to be a really good OEM hardware partner for like Dell and HP and IBM and all those other people. And I gotta say, if I had a partner that was cannibalizing my revenue stream, I wouldn't be too happy.
Well, think about it. IBM has tablets. Dell, everyone has tablets. So maybe
but didn't HP just make some announcements that they were going to be doing stuff on non-Microsoft operating systems? I know Dell has some laptops which non-Microsoft operating systems. So I think they're preparing in this case.
They're just fighting to stay alive, I think.
Yeah. Also on the Microsoft front, Microsoft just released, and this, by the way, does not run on a tablet, the SQL Server 2014 Community Technology Preview version 2, or as we used to call it, beta 2.
All these code name things, I don't get it. Technology Tech Preview version 2, beta 2, alpha 6, Roger, alpha over, under.
Roger. And the big items here are the in-memory database models for online transaction processing and data warehousing, plus full integration into Cloud Azure for disaster recovery and backup restore. So, that integration to Cloud Azure for disaster recovery, that's a really, really key thing. Have your SQL Server on site. It fails into the cloud. Yeah, you'll get some more latency there, but at least you're not dead.
Yes.
In this case. So this, I guess, is the week of database because we also have something on the MySQL front, the 5.7 development milestone release 2. Once again, numbers, acronyms, all the sorts of things.
5.7 development milestone release 2, Roger over, alpha over, Roger.
Lions and tigers and bears, oh my.
Yes. It's a big week for the number 2.
Yes, it's a big week for the number 2. Ooh, there's a hidden message in our show today. The message is number 2, yes.
Yes, I feel like we're the Muppet Show. Oracle is claiming processing capability of up to 500,000 queries per second using the OLTP RO point select 8 tables benchmark.
Yes.
Well, that's another acronym and another number. I don't know why they're not using the TPC-C since that seems to be the standard for database benchmarks, but, they're probably picking and choosing from ones that give them the best number.
Yes, exactly.
They did hold the 32-core, another number, hardware as a constant between the previous release test. It also has new replication features, more kick-butt cloud integration, and in addition to this, the MySQL logo can be found in an undisclosed location on one of Larry Ellison's boats. So it is moving ahead.
It's not covered by barnacles any longer.
It may be on a coaster, a napkin,
coaster, a napkin, or something. I will say the competing. You remember when Sun, before they were purchased by Oracle, they had some of the first quad-core 8-way boxes. So that's where the 32-core competition came from. And oddly, I remember doing some TPC benchmarks with SQL Server at Microsoft on Sun boxes, which scared some people. They were like, what? There's Sun boxes at Microsoft in the labs? How did that happen? It was beautiful.
Yeah, I know. They get a little scared in that case.
Yes, exactly.
On the reporting front, Splunk Enterprise version 6 is now available. Mark, you and I have had this discussion. I like logs. I like going to the objective source. And Splunk is one of my go-to tools in this case. So if you like your logs processed, julienne, smoothied, analyzed, reported, then Splunk, hey, it's a place to go. I like to use Splunk in conjunction with my performance test to actually go against the logs, make sure things are configured properly, to look for hidden gems that are spanning multiple pages that might be hidden in a page response time, things of that nature. So, good tool, especially if you are crossing logs and you're tracking items as they go from one platform to another. You think of it as the giant superset of something like a Microsoft log parser, which is really isolated to one log, one platform, things of that nature. So it's pretty good.
Ophir, I think do you guys have a cooperation with Splunk?
We actually don't. We have with New Relic, but we don't with Splunk.
New Relic, that was right. Okay. Any plans to maybe for hooking up with the Splunk guys?
Not at the moment. We do have plans with hooking up with a lot of people in general, but it's not any time in the immediate future.
Well, Valentine's Day is coming up, and that is an appropriate hookup time. So
it is.
That's true.
That's right. And I will say, I always like my logs sautéed in like kind of a white wine, shallots kind of white wine kind of sauce with a nice sort of heady Chardonnay to go with it.
Really? I'm more of just raw log files, no sauté, no butter, no salt. Just give it to me as they're created. Raw, maybe steamed, but that's the most.
That's the most, yeah. Just to soften the log just a little bit.
Exactly. Make it more, editable and
a little bit more palatable.
Exactly.
Beautiful.
Lastly, on the news front, Ophir, one of your items from BlazeMeter, you have released a Google Chrome extension for recording JMeter scripts. And Mark, I believe you were quoted in the press release.
Indeed, I was. It was Danielle and I. We ganged up together and came up with this very interesting thing.
Do you want to read your quote, or shall I try to channel you in reading?
Let's James, why don't you try to channel me? That would be funny.
Okay. Dramatic reading of Mark Tomlinson by James Pulley. By using the BlazeMeter Chrome extension, the script is created instantly from your actions in the browser. Testers can be assured that the script is accurate and reliable in the context of their test design, which in turn maximizes the credibility of the test results. Thus ends the dramatic reading of Mark Tomlinson by James Pulley.
Thank you very much. That was very nice. Ophir, tell us a little bit more about sort of how you guys got into doing the Chrome extension and where this might take BlazeMeter in the future.
Sure. Thanks a lot. As anyone who's tried to create a script in JMeter knows that, using historically what's been done most of the time is using JMeter's proxy capability. And I think for very simplistic scenarios, it works fine. Of course, you need to set up on your PC. But what we found that in today's complex environment where you're going to have AJAX calls and everybody has their own call to their own backend system and it's all secure, and more we were seeing people just struggling with why isn't my recording from the JMeter proxy actually reflecting what's happening?
Yeah.
And we got that a lot. And so we just said, well, why don't we just capture within the actual browser every single request which is made? And this also takes care of one of the biggest headaches we used to have, which is what about secure requests? Because those would always pop up with some security error. So basically, it was almost a no-brainer once we realized that that's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
And we created the Chrome extension. And I have to say, it's been a lot better, or I say a lot better solution than even I myself thought, because what I find myself now doing is I don't even open up JMeter anymore. I just open up the Chrome extension and start browsing, and it just works. So
yeah, very nice. It's a very nice extension. I have to say, some people might be confused. You're not running JMeter underneath the covers in creating what would be the resulting JMX file. This is a whole different recorder built natively in Chrome, right?
Yeah. So what's actually happening underneath the covers is that the Chrome extension is recording every single HTTP request. It's saving the header information, and we're even saving the cookie information should you want to use that. So hypothetically, let's say you're testing a site where you have to be logged in and you have to have cookies, you could even record that.
Cool.
And then the extension sends that recording information to the BlazeMeter servers, where we have a backend process which converts it into a JMeter script. And you can either download the script directly to your PC or have it automatically uploaded and then ready to run in the cloud.
Awesome.
It is awesome.
It's very nice, very convenient. So congratulations to you guys on that. I really like it. All right, let's dive into this thing. I want to talk about performance on the device. And, I was giving some presentations recently, and I was hanging out with Gene Ann Harrison at STPCon and some of the other mobile gurus, such as Phil Liu, right? And a couple other mobile folks at STPCon, and I'm like, I hold up my device and I still say something like, inside here is still a CPU, disk, memory, network, and I try to convince people that, it's all the same. The truth is, it's not the same, right? So, I mean, it's one thing to try to encourage sort of old school load testing, performance testing, network server guys to jump on board and not be afraid of a device so you can relate to it. But I've been doing that for 5 years now. So I guess my real question, and I'll put it back maybe to Ophir, if you will, like, how is it really different? It's not the same old CPU. It's not the same old disk on the physical device, right? How would you say it's morphed from the old school understanding of those core resources?
Well, I think, thanks for the question. I think overall it's still at its core, I grew up with an Apple II Plus, so it's still a computer at the end of the day. And it's not so much that you're dealing with a different paradigm in computing. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest difference is that when you look at performance testing, when you're doing performance testing on a standard website with a standard browser, the infrastructure which you're using to do the performance test is the same infrastructure as the actual client. In other words, it's the web, it's a browser, and to be able to simulate a HTTP request with a browser, you're going to be using the same performance testing tools as as you have in your actual browser. But when you're talking about mobile, you're doing a simulation now because it's not the same network. It's not the same memory. And I think ultimately what we're seeing is that it's kind of an estimation at best in terms of what we think. I mean, something as simple as the volatility of a mobile network. You just don't have that on the internet. The internet is pretty stable nowadays. And I think the biggest difference is just that we're doing a simulation which works fine for desktop clients and websites, but it's still just a simulation when you get into the mobile world. So I think that's really the biggest difference that we're seeing.
Yeah, and James, you were going to say.
Yeah, just to follow up from what you were saying, Ophir, about this variable nature of componentry in the mobile universe. It almost seems like you're trying to nail Jello in a lot of cases in your test design, because we like to have constants in our test design that are non-volatile. You look at a mobile device as an example. It's very difficult to control from a testing perspective because let's say you have a low battery condition, it might start cycling down the CPU. It might start cycling down other items that are going to impact the initial state of the device at the beginning of the test. So you have all these moving pieces, and at least what I found, and Mark, you might want to extend this, is that I have to limit the number of variable components in the test design in order to be able to construct a test. I can't cover every possible edge case, but what I can do is control things such as the highly variable nature of the network through simulation or other items. I might even be able to control some other elements related to types of devices, slow devices, fast devices, related to how it's processing locally to increase latch time. But there's just too many things to nail that Jello to the wall effectively to cover 100%. Mark?
Yes. Well, I there's always room for Jello. That's the first thing I'll say. It's that and pudding, because you get pudding. The same company makes pudding and Jello brand pudding. Yeah. But I think the number one thing that if you're testing through, let's say a lot of people complain you can't test accurately through an emulator. But even the emulators are getting smarter. They can emulate, like Ophir says, sort of the variability. You can sort of turn the network on and off. You can throttle the network. You can do all sorts of simulation. But if you're measuring the end user experience time wise, right? Start the stopwatch, do 3 things, and then stop the stopwatch on the physical real device. There's a lot of CPU variability. Look at an ARM-based processor. I mean, in the last 4 or 5 years, the ability for the CPU to throttle itself, and it's all about preserving the all sacred power in the battery, right? So a mobile device is like, if I can start, doing things a little slower and that'll save some battery juice, the end user is going to value that extended battery life much more than getting it sub-second response time. So a lot of testers that test from a client-side performance like you say, Ophir, something that's like the network's nice and fast. I test from my desktop, and that's how I test my browser, doing web performance optimization or some of the YSlow, Steve Souders techniques. That's all super fast, non-simulated, and it's like the best case scenario. Then you move to the device, and it's like the CPU can be throttling itself. The network is definitely variable and throttling itself. So I think the main tip I'd say right out of the gate for somebody measuring response time on a device is take those 4 core resources, but now come up with every variation, every possible type of network. The battery power is less. You got to add power in there, and the device itself will behave more slowly. And one of the main reasons it's going to behave more slowly is because it's trying to preserve that battery juice. So add CPU, disk memory, network, and power. I used to say network's the most important thing, but it seems like power is the least common denominator that makes all those other resources throttle themselves so that you can preserve battery juice. Would you guys agree with that?
I would agree with that, but I would add back in that network component because it is so highly variable.
True.
And it's shared at the tower level. Any really bad practices on the network, for instance, let's say you have either a mobile website or a hybrid application that uses 15 file sheets and 25 JavaScript files.
Yeah.
Well, have you considered perhaps consolidating and eliminating items that are unstyled or not needed?
Yeah.
For the moment, those bad practices are going to be magnified just by nature of the network in this case, and that of course is going to delay any type of end user end-to-end response time back through the interface.
Yeah, I'd have to also just agree in terms of what we're seeing is that the network volatility and just the order of magnitude of the difference on a fast versus a slow network, it almost dwarfs sometimes the difference you're going to see in something like CPU or memory. But there's one thing which we haven't mentioned that I have to say really surprised me when we started testing with real devices is the difference also in the operating system and the physical machine itself. I mean, we were doing testing on an iPhone on 6.1 versus 7 versus OS 5 and on, let's say Samsung Galaxy and different versions of Android. Yeah. And the same website, and the only difference and even the same network characteristics, but just different versions of operating system or different physical hardware and it's high-end hardware, you still see, a 20, 30, sometimes even 50% difference in response times. So we definitely have to also factor in just the multitude of different, operating systems and physical devices. So that's something also we got to make sure we don't forget.
That's higher than I would have expected. I mean, if it could be like 30% difference, even if you're following the same best practices for, let's say, platform A, if every company has the bring your own devices, but they'll come up with a matrix of here's all the different combinations of operating system, physical device, and browser, etc., that they're going to support. And so that means having that matrix really well defined, and that matrix is going to change from month to month to month because these devices come out really fast, right?
And not only that, but as soon as you start adding your own software on top of that device, you're going to impair its optimal state.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Hosting for PerfBytes.com has been provided by NUCO, New Centers of Excellence in Performance Engineering, PowerTest Professional Services, The Script Farm, LoadRunner by the Hour, Videratech, Cloud Architect, and No Load Test. For more information, go to www.newcoe.com or call 703-856-8187.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about getting into how you're going to build an application to do this. And the first thing I want to point out is, what do you guys think is the most critical activity for using a mobile app? Anyone?
Critical thing for using a mobile app.
Critical activity.
Using it or designing it?
Using it. So from an end user perspective, if you're going to build a mobile app, what's the most critical part for mobile performance?
Well, for the user experience, I'd have to say the interface has to be optimal for the screen size of the device. Just from a general user experience perspective.
Yeah.
Ophir, what do you think?
Sure. I was actually going to say, especially when we get into mobile apps, because I think for mobile websites, users already have in their mind the expected experience that when they click on something, there's going to be some little scroll wheel or some visual representation that I'm going to the network and I'm thinking.
Yeah.
But what we found is that when you're using a mobile app, and this is something which drove me crazy, I won't name names, but there was a mobile app that I would click on a button and nothing happened, and I would click on it again, and like 3 seconds later, something would happen. And what I didn't realize at the time was it was going to the network, and sometimes it takes time to download, but it's the visual feedback that we all know what to expect from a browser. But when you're doing a mobile app, there is no kind of practices, or there is no standard, and this is how I know that the system is thinking. So just make sure that you're factoring in there's going to be a load time, there's going to be response time, and let the user know I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And show them something. Or even one specific app, which I remember when you clicked on a button, it actually showed you a little kind of red area that, okay, I saw you clicked. Don't do this 20 times now just because it takes a second to respond.
The ever impatient end user. And this is to my point. When I asked some folks recently at the conferences I went to last month, it was, we overlook that ever simple launching time. And the first impression is a lasting impression, right? So if I click on your icon and it just takes forever to load, I don't care if you're the greatest. Once I get it running, I don't care if it's the greatest app in the world. I'm probably going to try to kill the thing before it even finishes launching if it takes like 10 seconds to launch. And that's the same. I go back a long time. It's like, what's the most critical transaction for your application? Logging in. Logging in is pretty critical. Like, you can't do anything else until you log in. So I would say I think you guys are right on with form factor being crazy devices. That's a key thing. And as you point out, for being able to actually give some good UX design is great. But get your app up and running really, really fast will be the first. To me, it's the first thing I think of when it's like, what's the performance of this app? Even if it's really lightweight as it gets loaded, there's some things you can do when you're building your application in order to get it to launch really fast. You can do things like delay the rest of the initialization of the libraries in the app so that the actual init piece goes really fast and you display the screen. Hybrid apps are classic for doing this, right? Because a hybrid app, a mobile app, will display some sort of little Chrome or some sort of pseudo browser or custom browser, and it'll look like the app is up and running, but really behind the scenes, it's got background threads that are loading other stuff, right? And so there's a few other tips that I had come up with. One, just delaying that app initialization. If you're on iOS, you can minimize your nibs, so make sure your nibs. You guys know what a nib is, right?
That goes into
These small pieces of chocolate.
That goes into a quill pen that you dip into an inkwell.
Exactly. So we are hot mobile technologists, aren't we? Because we go to chocolate and pens. No, that's not right. That's right. But there's all sorts of different best practices, and I'll throw the links out on the website for the post so you can see this. Minimizing your global variables, right? Remembering how to use pointers instead of blocking the main thread to get to a global variable. So, Ophir, in the situation you mentioned, they probably did a good thing, which was fire up a background thread waiting for a long-running network process. You would never want to block the main thread and make the app unusable while you're waiting on the network. But in your case, you wanted some indication that, hey, don't do anything else until I get this thing from the network, right?
And also factor in, sometimes the network is going to be down, and let me know what's going on. And I can't tell you how many times. I live in New York City, so a lot of times you're in the subway, and I start an app and I go into the subway and I still keep on using it, and all of a sudden, it just freezes because it's trying to do some network stuff and it doesn't have connectivity. So keep that in mind.
Maybe it's got classic timeouts in the background where it's waiting 2 minutes or something like that and it can't get to something. Another few things you can do is called stripping. Now, James, don't get carried away. I don't mean actual stripping.
Okay.
Wait, is that when your iPhone strips?
No, that's and it's not Anthony Weiner.
So is this like a phone without an OtterBox case?
No, it's not that. What we mean is the actual app code, the mobile app code. If there's any dead code, like you would with any application, if you want to make it lightweight launching. One of the things we did with back at Microsoft when the Adobe guys wanted to launch the Acrobat Reader install really fast, we rebased their DLLs and we stripped out a bunch of unreferenced code in the launcher. So with mobile apps, again, because the resources are so slim and they're throttled or they're variable, stripping out any dead code from your libraries means you can load it into memory that much faster because it's just smaller.
Mark, that is not what my developer is telling me. I need to have all of these items in there, because he might use them or she might use them at some point in the future. So, this refactoring of code to remove dead code, I just don't get it, Mark.
Well, that's because you're an old school procedural programmer and you haven't really made the adoption into truly object-oriented programming yet.
Mark, you're actually correct. I think in functions and mentally translate to objects. So you are correct. I haven't made the philosophical leap.
Yes, that if you don't need those objects, don't take up the memory because that takes time to actually load those things into memory. So launch time is actually really critical. And there's how Steve Souders has the first rule in the web performance optimization, James, where he says do less.
Yes.
It's very Jedi mind trick Yoda. Do less, right? Android, according to Android, in their performance guide, and two of the guys I talked to that do Android, there are two basic rules for writing efficient mobile code, in their opinion. One, don't do work that you don't need to do. And number two, don't allocate memory if you can avoid it. So see, on number two, if you can strip out dead code or symbols or debugging and dynamic binding info, leave that stuff out because you don't need that memory. Don't allocate
and
it.
Mark, this is where bad practices for cheap hardware, cheap CPU, cheap RAM are biting people in the rear that are moving to mobile.
Yeah.
They're having to actually go back and write efficient code.
Yeah. So if you don't really know how to write really tight mobile code, these are some, and I'll post these two links. They're really good for iOS and Android both. Get into some details about how to optimize your code. Ophir, any thoughts before?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this list, and I mean, I started programming in my Apple II Plus, and it becomes obvious now that what used to be standard practice. I mean, back in the days when you had 64K of memory and you needed your code to be lean and mean, when you didn't have 20 cores and 72 gigabytes of memory, then you needed the code to be lean and mean. And I think we've become spoiled and lazy as programmers. And we'll just throw more resources at it.
Yeah.
And now in the mobile world, we're back to these devices, which are effectively kind of like the computers of, 10 years ago. And we're back to, yes, you do need to have your code be lean and mean, and you can't just throw more hardware at it. So it's interesting how we've kind of come, 360 back to where we used to be.
Yeah, and I think also if you're not lean and mean, that means you're fat and lazy, maybe. But from a code perspective, if you abuse the CPU, if you abuse these other things, the user experience goes down, and also it just kills the battery.
And of course, hardware developers are doing their best to catch up by introducing dual core, quad core, and maybe 8-core processors on the phone and tablet.
Which chews up more battery.
Well, it does, but because they realize, developers are bad.
That's right. They are.
They're lazy.
And developers are lazy, and they're not going to change their practices. So hardware is just going to have to catch up.
That's right. Let us then shift gears. James, it's time once again for our good friend Satan to introduce the news of the damned. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Hello, PerfBytes listeners. It's your old friend Satan here. It is with great esteem that I am proud to introduce this week's edition of The News of the Damned.
Can you dig it?
Yes. You know, you need more reverb if you're going to do the Vincent Price laugh.
Okay.
Yes, that's right.
So
And
anyway,
there's the sound of the guy in the background again screaming.
I know. Yeah, he's using a mobile device that's crashed over the weekend. So Mark, just a few quick things on News of the Damned. First up, actually Gmail, Google, and I experienced this personally over the weekend. A lot of messages related to too many open connections.
Open connect. I thought LinkedIn was the connection thing, not Gmail.
Well, I think this is on the IMAP front. So it's definitely something going on the server side. Maybe they did a push. Maybe it's a configuration issue. But I heard this from a number of individuals in different locations around the country. Is too many open connections to the server for IMAP.
So, all right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So my guess is it's a configuration management associated with a new build.
Something didn't close the connections.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah. Go clean up your room. Don't forget to clean up your room.
increase the number of file handles and shorten the timeout.
Yeah.
Next up, Mark, have you heard of the application called Common App or Common Application?
No, maybe Ophir. Have you heard of this?
It is a site associated with the applications for college entrance.
Oh, yes.
So you have one location you can go to and you can fill out all the common forms, and I guess you can write a common essay, and you can apply to a whole bunch of colleges online. Well, as closeout times for applying to colleges is getting closer, what has happened is load has been increasing on the site. You know, we're all procrastinators at heart.
Yeah.
And we kind of fight against it one way or the other.
Yes.
But especially students, seniors in high school that are applying to college.
You have senioritis. You're not going to write a whole bunch of unique essays, right?
Yeah. So anyway, you get all this load coming up, approaching a deadline for applying to colleges, and what do you think happens?
Ophir, what do you think happened?
The system performs flawlessly.
So
Ophir,
naive.
you need to be listening to more episodes of the News of the Damned.
That's funny.
Because it did not perform flawlessly. It went down several times, impacting the ability to apply to colleges. In fact, some colleges and universities had to extend their application deadlines associated with the use of the site. And it was complicated by the fact that they were even making changes on the site during their high volume period, which is definitely against recommended practices. In fact, I pulled a quote from October 25th. The slow performance some of you have encountered earlier this evening occurred as we were rolling out corrections to the system. The slowness was isolated to certain servers, which is why some users experienced the problems, and others, we loved you and you did not. I added the "we love you" piece.
They love you. So, James, the one point that you and we have good, close connections with Dan Bartow,
Yes.
who's Mr. Testing Live in Production, and actually Microsoft, Seth Elliott. And I'm sure, Ophir, BlazeMeter-wise, you do lots of real live testing in production with all the techniques. Would you ever advise somebody do live load testing in production during their peak time?
Not unless they want a call from the CEO.
Yeah, exactly. Not unless you really want, the CIO standing over your desk and you're handing you a
This
box.
is call from the CEO for like golf outing, right?
Saying, why did I get a call at 2 a.m. on Sunday?
Oh.
Okay, yeah. So this is bad planning. Bad planning.
So next up, we can't have a News of the Damned without something involving tickets and something involving the Commonwealth.
Oh, yes. It's the UK. It must be a crashed website. Sorry, it's a crashed website. Must be mobile tickets.
No, it's not the UK. It's actually in Canada, Mark.
Oh, Canada. That's twice last week. Last episode we had
So
Canada.
instead of tickets to the aquarium, it is now tickets for tours of the Kingston Penitentiary. Now, this is a historical building.
Is that where they send bad programmers?
Ooh, very good. I'd say that's good reuse in this case. It's about a 180-year-old building. So this kind of harkens back to the era of when, the European powers were putting criminals and people they didn't care for on floating barges and push them out into the Atlantic, to populate the New World type of thing. Yes. But the tickets are for tours to benefit the Canadian Habitat for Humanity. The original ticket provider they picked could not keep up with the demand. I guess, people looking to see where great grandpa, was living for a while. I don't know.
Yeah.
And they have since switched to Ticketmaster of Canada, and everything is good.
Okay. So good on Ticketmaster. And actually, if Habitat for Humanity is a very good.
Yeah. So even if you don't want to take a tour of the Kingston Penitentiary, if you want to buy a ticket for Canadian Habitat for Humanity, go buy a ticket. It's a donation.
Yeah. Very good. Right on.
So next up, we have a classical point load situation.
Oh dear.
And it involves also tickets, maybe, and athletics. So we all know that high school football fans are kind of ravenous. The website for the Tennessee Secondary School Athletic Association.
Say that 10 times fast.
The Tennessee Secondary School Athletic Association, which has the acronym of TSSAABBBCCND.
CDSC 2, number 2. Don't forget, you got to put a number 2 in there.
It crashed. It took 30 minutes to bring back up when the brackets were posted online for the state high school championship football playoff series. So classical point load condition, you have thousands of interested parties waiting for the precise moment when the brackets are announced, and then they're going to run to the site, and then whammo, all load goes to infinity, website melts down, all that sort of stuff. And I went out and took a look at the website and see how it's performing today, and it's coming up fairly quickly.
Yes.
But they really didn't learn from this event. And NS Lookup shows that no CDN provider is involved. They have a lot of static components that are constantly being re-requested, so they lack a cache control header on these items. So, that's a bad practice right there. They have no compression enabled on all of these static components as well. So the site is working 10 times harder or more than it really has to on an ongoing basis. They could have gone to any of the CDN providers such as Akamai, or rolled their own with Squid, Nginx, combined with some DNS modifications, and handled all this load seamlessly. Because heck, they're in Tennessee.
Yes.
How many different nodes of Akamai would they need? It's not like people from North Carolina are going to go to the Tennessee Athletic Association.
That's right. This is a classic example of people who just don't understand everything between the browser and the back end. Right? No CDN. And they think, it's just, I could do a browser cache. Well, wait a minute. It's the first time you posted it on the origin.
We could make a joke here and say, hey, we play football. We don't know websites. But, I think they also do lacrosse and soccer.
It's real football. Yes, exactly. And it would be apropos to say, boom goes the website.
Ooh. Good one, Wilbur. Next up, we got two more. Matt Lauer, host of the Today Show in the United States, crashed a website. He mentioned a robocall screening service called NoMoRobo.
NoMoRobo?
NoMoRobo. It's spelled NoMoRobo. NoMoRobo. It's a robocall blocking service. And of course, when he mentioned it, all the fans on the Today Show who don't like robocalls all rushed the site, and then boom, green smoking goo.
Yeah, and now it's no more robo, because no more robo is no more.
That reminds me of Lego My Ego.
Speaking of Jello and Eggo and no more robo. Oh, this is great.
And the number 2.
And the number 2, don't forget.
And lastly, this is an informational note related to what is missing from the news of the dam this week.
Yeah, there's a big silence in the room.
Yes. A certain site crashes have become background noise or background radiation or something. But we are moving healthcare.gov to the snafu file, the situation normal all fouled up folder.
Yes.
The number of stories on this site's lack of performance is like overrunning my RSS. And we will not revisit this site after this statement until it is in fact working, because then it will be news.
Yes, we did see on one of the hearings, there was the lady who was kind of the main project manager or something. So maybe we nominate her for the person of the year, team of the year for performance.
You know what? For the amount of people impacted, which is now in the millions of people, I would not be opposed to that.
Could be website outage of this century. It's very early in the century. Okay, so that's the news of the damned, James. Thank you.
Or go not be damned.
Right on. Let's dive in to the rest of our show. And I want to, we talked a bit about these concepts for how to code a few things correctly with your mobile app, what things might be really important with a mobile app running onto the device, and how those device resources have changed. And one of the key things, obviously, that everyone should know in doing a performance test is, how do I actually figure out what to monitor? What tools can I use on my actual device? So I came up with a handful of them, but I just want to open it up, Ophir, maybe to you first, to talk about what kinds of things that you guys do with BlazeMeter to help somebody get onto the device when you diagnose an issue.
Well, I mean, to be honest, we usually, in terms of diagnose the issue, don't get too much into the device itself in terms of the back end.
Yeah.
For us, it really is about user experience. I mean, and part of the issue, I think, is there's such a plethora of different devices, different operating systems. I mean, I can always say, yes, I'm going to do iPhone, and then I might just be, have a handful of tools. But, unlike with a browser or just operating system where, you install some standard stuff on your machine, it's really difficult to try to do back end in terms of covering every single thing. So for us, it really is about just making sure we can accurately test the front end and making sure that we actually have, how long is it from when the user launches to, as you were saying, to when the app starts, or from when a page loads to when things are happening. And that actually brings up a really cool new feature, which we have at BlazeMeter, and it's currently in beta, where in parallel to testing the backend with obviously simulated devices, I mean, you're not going to be able to have 60,000 actual iPhones or Android devices create the load. It's just not practical yet. So you're going to be creating the load on the back end. And then in terms of the front end, we now have a feature where we're working with real mobile devices on real mobile networks in parallel to the performance test, which really complete the picture of, okay, now that I have the load in the back end, what is the actual user experience like? And being able to see the difference between what it's like for one user or 10 users or 10,000 users, I have to say it was really eye-opening for me, because just using simulated devices where I'm just measuring load time of all the resources, as we said, it doesn't give you the whole picture.
Yeah.
So I definitely learned a lot. As I was saying earlier, something as simple as how does a iPhone versus an Android device work? Also, one really important thing is, for instance, Wi-Fi versus using your LTE connection. So all those things are going to have a really big impact.
Yep.
So being able to see that in parallel, and it's a new feature we have in beta, I have to say is almost like completing the circle. So that's something which I'm really excited about.
Yeah. Now, when you guys are when you run a test, you have a real device. So you're actually talking about somebody actually physically, device in hand, running stuff in their hand while the load is running on the back end, right?
Yeah, but it's all automated. So we have, literally, this is automated devices. You don't need to actually hold it in your hand. Yeah. It's somebody with a stopwatch in one hand. We have 10,000 people somewhere in a third world country with, a stopwatch in one hand and an iDevice in the other hand. No.
Yeah.
Well, we actually have...
Well, that is the advantage of offshoring. They are far less expensive than US-based.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
except you have to send them devices and give them a network connection.
But then it's not realistic because they're doing it in not where the actual people or actual users are from. So
exactly, James. Listen to what he says. Come on now.
5,000 people all on one tower.
So it's actual devices where you have the ability to basically create a script which is again pretty easy. Of this is what the user is going to be doing. But the cool thing is you can add timers to whatever actions you want. So you can say, well, how long does it take from when I click on the app button to when the app actually says hi there, or how long from when I hit the submit button on the form to look up the flight to when I get the results, and being able to graph that alongside the actual response time from the back end and the number of users was really eye-opening, I have to say.
Cool. That sounds very, very cool. You also have an integration, I think, with New Relic, and I'm not sure. I think New Relic has some things that'll actually profile on a device as well. I thought they had a device profile.
They do have an SDK. New Relic has an SDK, which will give you some of that. I myself have not played around with it, but so here's the pros and cons, because there's a few options out there. If you want to actually get information from devices and you're willing to compile in an SDK with, it could be New Relic, and I know there's some other people out there too.
Yeah.
I think that's a must in today's world, because without getting the kind of real user information, you're just doing a simulation. So if you have that ability, and if you have your developers who are going to go with an SDK, whatever that should be, I think that should be mandatory for any app out there.
Yeah.
But the cool thing with the solution we have is it'll work with any app, any website. You don't need to modify your app, since we're just using out-of-the-box devices with out-of-the-box apps.
Yeah.
And just having this all be automated, and then it sends in all the information. You get this nice graph which will show you what the actual response times are.
So one option from an integration like with New Relic or with a profile is you have to crack into your app and load the SDK or load a framework in there to do that work. There's a few other options.
That brings to mind other items that are being used by companies to do live monitoring, not only New Relic, but SOSTA's got a similar type of add-on or a beaconing structure that they leverage. And, there's probably half a dozen more out there as well.
So aside from that, if I sort of bring it back down to the device level, for folks that are actually building an app and they want to know what the heck's happening on that device, one, in the context of a larger load test, correlating the client time is fantastic, and figuring out what the device is doing, if you can profile it in real time too, is very cool. But let's say you're actually getting into performance engineering, building the app. You want to know what the heck is happening during launch time, how much memory is allocated. And so in the iOS world, everything is the Xcode toolkit, right? It's a full framework for building apps, and you can monitor CPU, disk, memory, network. Inside your app, you can look at battery life. You can look at memory leaks are a big deal, especially in the iOS 7 world. The way things are running, I've heard things uptick quite a bit in terms of memory leaks. So using Xcode generally is, for iOS, the first place to start. The second thing, whatever toolkit you're using or a framework you're using in the Android world, there seems to be, it's like the Linux of mobile operating systems. It has all these other utilities. And this was talking to two other folks at the conference last month about what tools they actually use. And there's a bunch of them out there I didn't even know. And let me know if you guys have heard some of these. One I thought was very cool was there's a whole bunch of benchmarking kits that are like the Caliper micro benchmarking framework for Java. There's TraceView that I found out. And there's sort of weird things in terms of profiling around JIT or non-JIT. So in the Java world on a mobile device, there's just-in-time compiling versus not just-in-time compiling. And so if you can actually run without just-in-time compiling, then you save power and save CPU because you don't have to compile on the fly. So you can actually profile that stuff. But there's a few others out there around the JavaScript engine benchmarking. There's another one that just is sort of generic benchmarks that can say, here's my device, how does it rate? So it's sort of like, Tom's Hardware. You guys have heard of like the Tom's Hardware site, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And they have like sort of like Disk Bench, and they have these other Smart Bench, these other different tools that sort of give you generic, they're non-app specific, but hey, on this device versus that device, there's a lot of people using these tools. They still tell you CPU, memory, disk, and these other things, so you can see what's actually going on when your app is loading. And then you can get into, in the Android world, there's a whole bunch of other cool tools. And again, I'll post some of the URLs on the website. So there's one called Watchdog, which actually tells you sort of, keep an eye on these apps and what they're doing and give me sort of a history of them. There's the Android Assistant, which is on every Android device. You can always take a look at what resources are being used. And you can also set some of the basic settings for the launch times and which ones are delayed launching, which ones load in the background and stuff. So you can do all sorts of cool tweaking and monitoring of the apps through just the Android Assistant. And then there's another one called Greenify. There's another one called CPU Tuner. So you can actually go in and look at what that app is doing on each of those resources and try to compare them. Let's say at your company, maybe you're building 4 or 5 different mobile apps. Track them from build to build. Track them just like you would in any other methodology, in an agile methodology. In each sprint, how are we doing on memory with the app? Oh, the app is twice the size it was last sprint. What happened? We pulled in a third-party framework. We did something else. The same kinds of disciplines that you would bring to repeated performance engineering, you need these kinds of tools. Again, some of them we just mentioned here. But you need to be able to look at the device and track, all right, did we introduce any memory leaks? Do we need to benchmark this app differently so we can see it's chewing CPU? So let's get a CPU tool. Let's go get CPU Tuner and figure out where it's spending its time in the mobile CPU. And you can also tune the app to, take your measurements under different network connections, real network connections. You can take your measurements under different power conditions. Jean Ann, this is a shout out to Jean Ann. Did you test for, wait until the 20% battery warning goes off in the device, and then you're like, all right, now do the test and see what happens. So think about all the different conditions for all those different things. And these are just a few of those tools. In the iOS world, grab your Xcode. I'm not sure. I think Visual Studio actually has stuff that plugs in to the Windows Mobile world. I haven't confirmed that yet, though, James. You know? Or Ophir?
I would suspect it does. Microsoft is pretty good about kind of vertically integrating against all their platforms.
Yeah. Ophir, any thoughts on that?
No, I'm just thinking about going back to what we said, that there's so many different tools out there, and it really kind of does go back to just make sure you're kind of doing what you should do, and it's almost scary though. I know Halloween is behind us, but it's almost scary. Having to think about all this stuff which you need to do just to make sure that your code is behaving well and it's not taking a lot of time.
Yeah, it's like we've made it seem like it's, mobile is exciting and new. And to some new developers, some new folks coding, they've never coded for a PC or an old server system. Like they're still like the only apps. I've met some mobile app developers. The only thing they've ever developed are mobile apps. And they're making the same mistakes that I made in the first years of learning C or something like that. But to some extent, they leapfrog all of the learning from the bad mistakes and they jump right into mobile. And then, like we say, some of this code needs to be really tight and has very specific guidelines to be performing well. So follow these best practices, and that'll help you quite a bit. That kind of brings it to the end. Ophir, do you have any closing thoughts or recommendations on mobile app and device performance?
The only one, and I think this is something which we've discussed today, is really there's 2 parts of the puzzle for just about any mobile app. There's, you're going to have the back end performance and then the actual device performance. And it's just crucial. What I've seen is how crucial it is to not only test each part separately, but make sure you're testing them in tandem. Because I've seen so many people who just, are playing around with the device on a Wi-Fi network from their office and say, well, performance looks fine to me. But then, under a load of a few thousand people on the back end, just, everything goes haywire. So just make sure you're addressing both parts of the puzzle, because each one into itself is just going to give you half the picture.
Yeah, if you have a really tuned up the back end system to work in really lightweight network, cached really well and everything, but for some reason the libraries and everything are just slow as a dog on the client, you've kind of missed the picture, and vice versa, right? So
yeah,
you could have a really fast client, but for some reason all the caching or something screwed up on the back end, it's really slow. So yeah, you no different client server model. Both the client and the server have to perform really, really well. James, last thoughts on mobile app and device performance.
Just that on the network side especially, I see so many bad practices being extended into the mobile device side of the house. Minimize what you're going to ship back and forth. and make it count. Make every single byte count. Compress it. Limit the number of data flows. Limit your latch time to the server and your external dependency.
Very good. That's excellent. So that kind of wraps up the topic. We have two more sections that we're going to go into before we leave the show today. And Ophir, I'm going to ask you to join us while we review the PerfBytes inbox, which is an email. You can send us questions at ask@perfbytes.com. And these have come in over the last couple of weeks here. One of them, actually, I gleaned in person. So it's a manual submission to the PerfBytes inbox. So James and Ophir, the first, Amir actually writes to us. I notice that you guys seem to know a lot about why companies don't invest in performance testing very much, hence the news of the damn, James. But can you give me an idea as to why they do invest in performance testing and engineering?
Yeah, I feel like Horshack on Welcome Back Carter here.
Why do they?
Pain.
Okay, so maybe reactionary.
Yeah. Typically, companies that have made a strong investment in performance testing and performance engineering have done so after a large episode associated with pain. There is a website we can talk about, but we cannot talk about because we've already mentioned that we're not going to talk about it until it's working. But that is an example of pain, or if they've not hit pain, the risk to the enterprise is so substantially high that any amount they spend on performance testing, using the most expensive resources, the most expensive tools for the longest possible duration, is just a pittance compared with the risk of things not working.
Oh, yeah. So certain companies that if they're down for a minute, it costs them like $10 million a minute. It's just crazy.
Oh yeah. Think of Amazon if it were to go down for a minute, or Facebook if it were to go offline for 30 minutes. What that would actually mean.
Yeah. So there is that reaction versus proactive thing. Ophir, what do you guys see in terms of customers coming to BlazeMeter?
Yeah, I think you're taking it to an extreme where you're just looking at the impact of downtime. I think any company which is ROI based in the first place, I mean, it's been proven across the board, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, that improved performance. I mean, going from, let's say, a 2-second response time to 1.5-second response time has a significant impact on the bottom line. So what we're seeing is that companies which are very ROI based see it simply as money in, money out. You know, if it costs me $10,000 whatever to improve performance, then they can see in the bottom line how it actually impacts the bottom line.
Yeah, and Ophir, there's a huge opportunity cost. If you're a company A and someone comes to your website to buy a widget and you're taking too long, which I think too long qualifies as 2 or 3 seconds at this point, you're going to switch and you're going to go to another site and you're going to buy the widget there. And you're probably not going to go back to the first site until site B, site C, site D, and site E all fail, and then you'll go back. So it's not only the initial sale, but it's the opportunity cost of the follow-on revenue for poor performance.
Yeah. And there's one other thing which I want to say was a bit of an eye-opener for me, is some companies are really aligned in that the bottom line is everybody's responsibility. I've seen a lot of companies where the developers are just, responsible for making sure that everything works, and then, somebody else might be responsible for, let's say making sure that there's customer service. But when you have the developers understand that it's their responsibility for the bottom line as well, and you have somebody who, is high enough in the organization to be able to have these two people working together, that's when they understand performance testing. It's the worlds where, this isn't my problem, and companies which still have this isn't my problem, that's when you don't have performance
and you see that with smaller companies. It's a family. You're kind of all in the same single team. And I like doing performance work because you can realize the integrated benefits of working together in performance much sooner in a smaller company, smaller team. Even, I'm still a couple hundred people is still a small team in my book. Big enterprise departments in IT with thousands of people doing stuff. Yeah, that's where things tend to get disjointed. I agree. So great answers, reactive, proactive, and then particularly risk and ROI. A second question that comes to us is from Susan, who writes to us a nice, great question. Generally, how much time should I spend interviewing or observing end users in the designing of my performance test cases or use cases? First of all, I would applaud Susan. Good on you for actually interviewing and observing end users while you're designing your performance test. No one ever does that, right? We just make it up, right? So, James, how much? Actually, I'll start with Ophir this time. When you guys are working with customers to get them up to speed, let's say they're using the new Chrome extension, do you actually have people that observe an end user or put themselves in the end user's shoe?
To be honest, most of the time we look at like web analytics data. I mean, you can definitely go and ask a couple of people, but I think if you want to get a fair representation of what people are actually doing on your website to make sure that the user scenarios are realistic, go to your Google Analytics or Adobe data or Site Catalyst, whatever it is, and see what are the actual paths. What are actually people doing? How long is it taking them? What pages are they going to? And using that, I would say, is probably more valuable than just interviewing 2 or 3 people, which might not be an accurate representation of your actual users.
So maybe doing both, getting the macro view from the analytics, but then also getting in touch with, especially with mobile, real end users using the real apps, maybe getting some usability study there, maybe mixing the two.
Yeah. And you have to be careful of chicken and egg. Are people doing this because they don't know better or because this is the right thing to do?
Yes. So, James, chicken and egg?
I'm with Ophir. Go to an objective source. You mentioned analytics. I tend to go to the logs, hence my cheers for Splunk earlier.
Yeah.
But either way, it gets an objective view of what the users are working on over a large population of users, whereas what you see internally may not be a representative sample. Where that smaller group does have benefit is when you're looking at a time study for how much time between requests, which is not always as clear in the in the statistics that you're getting from your end user tools or from your logs. Do a little bit of a time study as to how long between page requests that a user might spend.
Yeah.
As an example, I'm at the login page. I'm reading some sort of news announcement before I go on to actually engage in my business process, and having some variability there would be very, very useful on your user observations.
There you go, Susan. So advice from the experts to help you. And guys, that brings us to the close of our episode 29 on mobile app and device performance. Ophir, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
So thanks again for joining us for another episode of PerfBytes. You've come to the close of another brain-rattling occurrence of PerfBytes, James. And we appreciate the time that you've taken to spend and listen to the show today.
And as always, I want to thank my mother for listening. Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom. Of course, I will certainly give my moderately intimate thank you to the sexy Irish voice of PerfBytes for everything she does to support the show. And again, special thanks to Ophir for joining us from BlazeMeter, blazemeter.com. That was pretty awesome.
And today's performance of PerfBytes is powered by developers who test with only a single thread.
A single thread on a mobile device, I might add, blocking that main thread so everything else stops, right? Exactly. And also be aware that the content of this PerfBytes show is protected and copyrighted by the same laws that protect nuisance birds. You may not know this, but all wild birds are protected by state and federal laws with the exception of the European starling, rock feral pigeon, and the English sparrow. This means you cannot shoot, trap, poison, or otherwise kill, capture, or possess one of these birds without a permit. However, there are many methods available to harass and prevent problems with birds that are damaging property.
But these same methods cannot be used to harass and prevent us from speaking.
You will never stop us.
For more information about PerfBytes, visit the show's website, www.perfbytes.com, or follow us on the Twitter and the Facebook.
Or join us for the next PerfBytes episode in about 2 weeks as we enter the last few days before the e-commerce hell ensues on Black Friday and Cyber Monday.
And of course, you can always subscribe and listen to the PerfBytes podcast on iTunes. Just search for PerfBytes in the iTunes store and click subscribe.
You should know that PerfBytes is a continued supporter of the Software Test Professionals community of testers, the Workshop on Performance and Reliability, Computer Measurement Group, and, of course, the Performance Engineering Book of Knowledge. All these wonderful things you can tune into and find at the PerfBytes website at www.perfbytes.com. Thanks very much for joining us. James, have a great week.
Mark, have a great week. And everyone, stock up on your hot chocolate and your bourbon for the next 2 weeks. You're going to need it.
You're going to need it. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.